welcome Dr. Y.Srinivasa Rao, Head of the Department of History, Bharathidasan University, Tiruchirappalli, who is the resource person of this last day webinar of the 1 week gender sensitization program on understanding social structure and gender. Towards the topic on is reason still unavailable for women to self-reform, being organized by Women's Studies Center of Madurai Kamaraj University, Madurai, and Department of Women's Studies, Bharathidasan University, Tiruchirappalli, in collaboration with University Grants Commission, New Delhi. I warmly welcome all the participants who are eagerly waiting for this wonderful session. I request Dr. C. Subbalakshmi, Assistant Professor of Women's Studies Center, Madurai Kamaraj University, to introduce the resource person of this inspiring session. Thank you. Subbu.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to all. On behalf of Women's Studies Center, Madurai Kamaraj University, Madurai, and Department of Women's Studies, Bharathidasan University, Tiruchirappalli, I feel honored to welcome the resource person, all the participants, and my fellow colleagues for taking a keen part of last day of 1 week gender sensitization program on understanding social structure and gender, in collaboration with the UGC, New Delhi. I feel proud to introduce and welcome highly resourceful personality, Dr. Y.Srinivasa Rao, Head in the Department of History, Bharathidasan University, Tiruchirappalli. Sir has more than 1 decade of teaching and research experiences. He has produced 36 MPhil scholars. He has completed a major research project in UGC. He has organized many conferences, seminars, and workshops. He also delivered nearly 100 special lectures. Sir has published 15 articles in newspaper and magazines, and also he published many research articles in national and international seminars and conferences. Once again, I welcome Dr. Y. Srinivasa Rao, sir, for sharing his views on this pertinent area. Is a reason still unavailable for women to self-reform. Now I hand over the session to sir. Thank you, one and all.
Hi everybody. I thank Dr. Manimegala and Radhika Devi for giving me this opportunity. Last time also did the same, that I am not a 100% expert in the topic I choose to speak. However, certain thoughts and ideas I have on the topic we should share. Is reason still available for women to self-reform? I have said women for self-reform. For a long time, I believe that women are depending upon men or male society, dominant male society, for reform. Though here and there women are there, I cannot deny. But I strongly believe at a particular point in time in our history, at least after independence, or say 1970s and 60s and the 80s, at least by 80s, women have acquired the ability of self-reforming by not depending upon, majorly by not depending upon male society. So they have acquired the ability of self-reform. They have declared so, but however, when you look at the actual reform that is taking place, especially the reform that is taken over by the women, seems to be problematic, and it's not complete in a sense that it is also, I would say, it is also selfish and superficial for my understanding to a large extent. Anyway, before we understand to what extent women engage with reason, logic, and common sense in this country, let me ask another question, related question, on the nation itself. To what extent nation, our own nation, engaged with reason, logic in its history? If you look at how, I cannot go into the topic in full detail, but from Indus Valley to present, the nation's engagement with reason and logic, for my understanding, the way I understood, it is a tussle between reason and logic, but whenever the reason raised its head, it is suffocated, strangulated, not totally eliminated, but successfully suffocated and strangulated. And the suffocation and strangulation of reason and logic has went on until the entry of the colonial modernity. After that, since the times have changed, and there was no question of totally suffocating or strangulating the reason and logic. They have settled, the male society, dominant male society, has settled for a compromise. Settled for a compromise. So that compromise is incorporating modernity into tradition. So from colonial times onwards, tradition and modernity existing side by side, that is our story. And that is our story from colonial times. After independence, there is a little bit change. Reason and secularism is gaining certain sort of a overhand over the religion and the rationality. But it's never been publicly, it's never been a declared sort of a prime character of the Indian society, rationalism or even secularism to some extent. But rationalism has never been a sort of a prime character of the Indian society. So after independence, secularism took over a fraught rationalism also promoted by Jawaharlal Nehru. It is sort of, we cannot say sort of rationalism that can be called radical. Radical rationalism only can be seen in Pule, Periyar and Ambedkar. In Nehru's rationalism, there is some amount of secularism, rationalism gone accommodated into secularism, got accommodated into secularism. Anyway, so India's story itself is so weak in terms of its engagement with the reason and logic. So can we expect the stronger engagement of women with the reason and logic? We cannot. So that is the story till colonial times. After that, unfortunately, reason and logic and rationalism are being criminalized. So rationalism is criminal, rationalist is a criminal, rationalism is a crime. So these are the kind of situations that we are having today. So from that, where women locates, within that where women locates herself. So going back to the question of is reason still unavailable for women for self-reform? If I have agreed just now that a woman position is so weak in terms of their freedom to engage with reason, so why I have asked the question, which is quite unfair question to ask, that is reason still unavailable for women to self-reform? Now, when I was referring to the entire nation. But when you are referring to women question, we need to ask this question to women community, especially educated intellectual community. From 1980s and all, is the situation is not gradually changing, where the woman is acquiring an ability to self-reform, a sort of an independence from the total control of the male society at various levels. The openness, the public sphere is opened, and when the open public sphere is actually supposed to be increasing the degree of freedom from for self-reform. So that's why I'm asking, from 1980s onwards, there is a visible and increased level of freedom for women to adopt reason to self-reform at personal level first, then to expand it to the other fellow community members. So when I asked that question, I asked that question with an intention of trying to see, is there a difference between and the level of engagement with the reason among women and men? If there is a difference, what is the difference? Why is the difference? What women should do to reduce the difference of engagement between male and female with the reason? Is that level of engagement, I'm talking about freedom of engaging with reason, is same with women across all castes and classes of women? The level of engagement, the degree of engagement could have been higher with the upper caste women or the upper class women with the reason and logic compared to that of the lower middle class and the poor women with the reason and logic. So if I come to a conclusion, or it's a general guess, or say based on some observation, I am saying that the upper caste woman, the upper class woman, after acquiring the ability of engaging with the reason, seems to have developed a certain sort of an anti-rational attitude after they acquired. So why is that happening? After they acquired the ability of engaging with the reason, the degree of engaging with the reason could have been much more higher. But however, I see a reducing engagement between the upper caste with the reason, between upper caste and upper class women with the reason and logic. So why is that happening? What are the reasons for that lesser engagement with the reason and logic, especially from the upper caste and the upper class women? So here we are just not looking at the level of engagement with reason by women in a contrast with male only, but also we are looking at within the women, we are looking at two categories, that is upper caste, upper class women, as well as lower middle class and poor women. So for reasons that we can understand why these two categories are very important to understand, and why there is a lesser engagement despite having the ability of engaging with reason and logic, why the upper caste women and the upper class women are giving lesser importance. Are they political? Are they prioritizing the tradition? If they're prioritizing the tradition, what are their political intentions? What are their cultural intentions? What are their cultural politics? So that we need to understand. So therefore, I'm just not like looking, I'm not just concentrating on one question here. I am also concentrating on the two important aspects here. One is between the male and female, and also nation as a nation, also, and as an agency, how we try to impose its overall cultural pattern on women, where women need to be a sort of a citizen who's supposed to be submissive, who's supposed to be patient, who's supposed to be presentable. So all these things, nation has its priorities, and the male society also has its priorities. But within the women, why the upper caste and upper class women develop certain priorities which are unfortunately similar to that of the male society. So that is what disturbing. That's why I asked this question. I strongly believe that at least 3 decades ago, women have certainly acquired the ability of self-reform, but they're unfortunately postponing or unfortunately not using or not employing the reason to the extent that will be helpful for the larger women's society. So apart from that, overall, especially the general Indian society, largely we are majoritarian. One community in this country is majoritarian. There is no doubt about it. That is deciding what is the cultural pattern of this country, what is the social pattern of country, what is the national culture, what is the national social systems, and all that. What is the national political culture? All that is being determined by that. But of course, rest of the dominant religious communities also are important. They're not that much liberal in terms of respecting women. But however, so since the majoritarian society is the one which is deciding what is the level of engagement of women with the reason should be, we need to focus on that a bit. So Ambedkar has complained after looking into the religious texts of Hinduism. He has complained that Hinduism has actually declared rationalism as a natural enemy to the Hindus. So after that, it obviously becomes an enemy for the entire nation, because that is what determines, that is the community that determines the level of engagement with the reason, because that is in the government that decides the policy. So therefore, the nascence level of engagement with the reason and logic is always be decided by the majoritarian community, because that gets the ability to make laws about to what extent the Indian civil society should engage with the reason and logic. So Hinduism prohibited especially Hindus from engaging with reason and logic. It said that if you have any doubts about doubts coming from your mind, you have to look for the answers within the smritis and shrutis. Therefore, beyond that you should not go. Beyond smritis and smritis, you should not go looking for any reasons. So even if you if that restriction is not is there, certainly that restriction is continued one or the other way. There is not much of a change, but we can say ignorable change is there. But largely that is the continuity. That is what the continues into the present also. We are looking for practical answers to our problems from the religious explanations till today. Though we are may not be referring to the text, but these explanations for the practical problems of women, as male as well, are available in the public domain. Consultations with the experts of the text. You may not be referring to the text, but the restrictions imposed on the rationalism is being continued among the experts, and that is being provided to the society, and we are availing that it is there with the experts. So till the entry of the colonial modernity, these restrictions, what I call Manu restrictions, are still there. But when colonial modernity came into India, there is a visible agreement that we need to change ourselves, because the context and the time cannot allow the Indian society to continue as it was in the pre-colonial times. So, or we can say pre-modern or modern times. So modern times are totally different. That means the scientific rationalism, enlightenment, and humanism are dominating the entire world from 16th century onwards. So therefore, there is no question of totally denying, totally strangulating, totally suffocating the reason, but we accommodate. So therefore, the society of the pre-colonial times was put through a sort of reforms, what we call 19th century socio-religious reforms. But those reforms are peripheral tweaking. Peripheral tweaking is that, the culture and culture, especially mostly anti-woman culture, was allowed to be reformed because they're found to be inhuman, 100% inhuman. So those things are taken for reforms so that India can present itself as a society that is civilized, cultured. So it is it's not second to any other society. So otherwise it will be a big trouble. So therefore, some amount of peripheral tweaking to the culture and society, social customs, norms, and cultural systems at this point in time. So that peripheral tweaking continued for a long time. 1829 is the beginning of the emergence of the modern India. It continued up to till the independent times. After that, Nehru took charge of reforming India, especially as a person who is at the helm of affairs. Apart from that, others also making their own, proposing their own models of reform. You have Gandhi, you have Periyar, you have Ambedkar, you have Periyar, you have Pule, you have Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. All these things from their own point of view are proposing the models of reforming India. But Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru took over because he became the prime minister. But then, by the time we got independence, what was India in terms of our logic, our engagement with the logic? Are we totally rational? Are we totally traditional? Are we totally secular? Or is this totality is possible? That means totally becoming rational, totally becoming traditional, totally becoming secular. Or these totalities are possible. Well, I think if you compare the Mustafa Kemal Pasha of Turkey with that of Jawaharlal Nehru gone easy on total transformation of India from that of a deeply religious to that of at least say 50% rational, but he did not do it. He could not, he must have thought that it will be problematic to the Indian society, which is so multicultural and multi-religious. It is not easy to put the country to the chaotic situation after the independence. So, however, Nehru also gone easy. Uh, uh, Therefore, we have three versions of India has emerged, especially in terms of rationality. You have India itself emerged into three selves. One is radical rational self, irrational religious self, and the secular self. So, radical rational self is represented by Jyotiba Phule, Savitri Phule, B.R. Ambedkar, and Ramaswamy Naicker. Irrational self is represented by most of the dominant religious societies at that point in time, and then Dayananda Saraswati, and to a large extent M.K. Gandhi also. Secular self is represented by Jawaharlal Nehru, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and all these. So, when country itself has gone into what multiple personalities like radical rational self, irrational religious self, and secular self, how such a country would go through the process of rationalism, which is so essential for any country to eliminate the social inequalities, torture, agony, pain that we put through because of our socio-religious cultural customs. So that is how the engagement of nation with the reason has unfortunately become less till say 1960s, at least 1970s. After that, it was picking up, and same is the case with women also. Women, you have emergence of large number of women are emerging. At this point in time, unfortunately, the India has settled for secular, not rational or not totally irrational religious self. It has settled for secular self. So when it is settled for secular self, pressure on the nation to become rational is very less. When secular opens the gates for everybody to propagate their own religion, this automatically reduces the opportunity of engage with the reason. Understand? So therefore, when the secularism became a prime character of the nation, rationalism automatically will be pushed into the backseat. But the irrational self is not dead. It continued simultaneously. Now it is dancing in the streets. So irrational self is not dead. Irrational self is always there. But what irrational self acquiring the political functions, it becomes a serious problem. That what we are seeing today. So it is true that men have dominated or controlled the reason and logic in this country. From the time it came even till today, men are controlling the reason and logic. That's why they have the ability of self-reform. They self-reform for their own development, but they controls it to go into the women. So the flow of rationalism is lesser to the women to some time, as I already pointed out. But at certain point in time, 3 decades ago, certainly women are acquiring the ability of self-engaging with the reason without the support of men, so that they could have employed it more radically. But unfortunately, the amount of radicality that we see in women is quite less compared to that of men. Uh, Nation's engagement with reason and logic that I have already pointed out, but why that engagement is lesser? Is it political? To what extent the reduction of the engagement? To what extent the emergence of India into a three selves is political? It is not natural. One cannot say that naturally India has become radical rational self and traditional religious self and secular self. It is political. India has actually compartmentalized itself based on the socio-political requirements and essentialities. So India has decided to engage with the reason in a superficial way. In a superficial way. That superficiality is unfortunately is determined by the majoritarian society in this country, who decided the superficial majoritarian country. As I told you, they are the ones who decides what is national culture. So in the national culture, who should be women? What should be women? What could be the prime characters of the woman? Who is an acceptable woman? What is woman in open, the public space? What is the woman in private space? So national culture is determining, deciding the characters of women, and according to the priority of the national culture, so they are creating the space or creating characters, allocating those characters to women. So this superficial engagement of nation with the region is one of the reasons why our engagement at national level, when you compare, when you try to segregate the entire nation into communities, some caste or some community has a higher level of ability to engage with reason is higher, and some castes are lesser. So that we need to keep in mind. Apart from that, overall as a nation, certainly nation is controlling the Indian citizens' ability to engage with the reason. One cannot say that if someone, the government is directly saying that, look, you don't engage with the reason. Government does not say so, but it doesn't need to say directly to you, but it evolves certain means and mechanisms to control your mind from engaging with the reason. That we need to agree and understand. So it's superficial engagement with reason certainly reduces the ability of a common citizen, even an educated citizen, even an intellectual citizen, even a scientist who everyday basis engaged with reason, their level of engagement with reason is controlled by the national, political, cultural, and religious priorities. So as soon as the rationalism becoming a force of reforming the society, national cultural forces are coming up with a counter enlightenment, a counter to the enlightenment. Earlier, when Buddhism was becoming a major philosophy of transforming the society, there was counter revolution, what Ambedkar calls. So then after that, when the rationalism came into, European enlightenment came into, scientific rationalism came into India, there was a counter enlightenment. This counter enlightenment is certainly to control the reason. It does not give the cultural priorities of India, does not allow the rationalism to flow into the nation 100%. It put blocks at various levels. So those blocks worked very well. That's why we have the simultaneous existence of a scientist as a rational self and irrational self. Even scientists, as in my earlier lecture, I was pointing out the daughters of modern day Leelavatis, that is the scientists and women scientists and engineers, are absolutely religious. They are less rational, more religious, both colonial times and in the post-colonial times. I am not saying all of them, but many of them are the compartmentalized selves. They are rational and irrational at the same time. So a reason for that, they're not only ones. Many of us are compartmentalize ourselves into rational self and irrational self. So that is the result of the counter enlightenment. The politics of counter enlightenment is that it reduces the ability of reason and logic to transform the society. It reduces the force of reason and logic to scrutinize the irrational cultural systems and social customs. So had we given the free permission to reason and logic in this country from 19th century, most of the sufferings of women and Adi Dravidias or the Dalits and Adivasis and the Bahujans in this country could have been lesser. Because most of the suffering, pain and agony today is happening because they're allegedly violating the cultural norms of the society. This violation of the cultural norms of the society, violence for violating the cultural norms of society in 21st century is quite ironic. That you cannot believe that at this point in time somebody was being beaten for transporting a cow. A Dalit in Pune, Gujarat incident is a clear-cut evidence that had such a cultural system put through the serious scrutiny of reason and logic, then that accident that has happened or the incident that has happened in Pune, Gujarat, beating 4 Dalits by tying them to a truck could not have happened. So why it has happened? Or it has happened because that we have not allowed the reason to scrutinize our culture. Had we allowed the reason to scrutinize our culture, such rarity of those kind of incidents could have been more rare, very rare. Those things should not happen because that cannot be the standards of the civilization of this society in 21st century. It should not have been the standards of the society in 20th century itself. But when you look at the standards of the society, if there is an incident where you are being beaten for cow transportation, alleging that you are violating a social norm, it explains that the counter enlightenment unfortunately did its 100% job. It has done its job very well. It has successfully blocked the rationalism becoming the main transform of society. It itself, the counter-rationalism, counter-enlightenment became a force that has kept the society or allowed the society to simultaneously rational at one time, religious at the same. So this is a problem with the society. So when you look at the question of women, in India, I was talking about some categories of women where upper caste women I was referring to upper caste and upper class as one category of women, lower class and lower middle class and poor women as one category of women in their level of engagement with the reason and logic. Now, let me take the category of the educated intellectual and educated in women together. If again further go for the classification of women to understand their engagement with the reason and logic, we can go for again educated intellectual women, educated women, again innocent women. So among the educated intellectual women, they have a different priorities along with them in them. That is adapting the ideologies that suits to them. For example, Gandhianism is an ideology. Gandhianism is an ideology for certain sections of women. That is combination of upper caste and upper class as well, mostly intellectually educated. And you have radical intellectual women also, and you have religiously radical women that I don't understand how it's possible, but however they also simultaneously exist. And if you look at these categories, there is, Gandhian women, radical intellectual women, and religiously radical women. If you look at these categories, I found it's very disturbing. Except I'm happy that there's radical intellectual women, but the existence of the Gandhian woman and the radical religious women quite surprising for me, because if you try to understand Gandhianism and its relation, what Gandhianism can do to women, Gandhianism again relocates women in the traditional framework of a traditional woman. It does not transform women from being traditional to that of an agency that acquires the equality, ability to question, or ability to declare independence, or ability to ask for participation in the democratic processes. But my understanding, as already tells me, that many highly educated intellectual women turned out to be Gandhian women. For Gandhian women, there some amount of independence, some amount of self-reform is available with Gandhianism. That means you can self-reform yourself into a woman who can renounce worldly things. You can go to the extent of celibacy. You can go to the extent of living a simple life. But such an individual Gandhian woman, can they transform the society? To what extent they can transform the society? If they present themselves as the examples, they as individuals, exemplary individuals, working among the deprived and depressed communities, may be one of the appreciable character of that model, Gandhian woman model. Living simplistic lifestyle is one of the important character of the Gandhian woman model. But they're failing to be radical, or failing to contribute to the larger changes in the society. It what bothers me. That I found most of the scientists are Gandhians. There are many political activists, many political activists were Gandhian women. So Gandhian women, they contribute to the society, but when you look at where the radical transformations of women life is needed, Gandhianism cannot help. Because Gandhianism as a main, as an ideology, it does not leave the woman. It allows the woman to go into the public sphere. It allows the woman to participate, but that is not enough unless and until the Gandhian women acquire the ability of radically questioning the superstructures of discrimination. But they don't do. Their ideal is Gandhianism does not allow. So individually they self-reform, and individually they present themselves as reformatory models, and they do the work in their own limited sphere, and they can contribute, of course, but they cannot actually transform the society at the larger level. So with radical women, if you look at radical rational women, certainly they have the ability of transforming, because they as an individuals in a larger society will see them as troublesome individuals. They go to the extent of the general society, especially the open society, which is mostly dominated by the generalistic thinking of importance of religion and all. If the entire nation collapse, lack of culture, then what will happen? The entire country will go into the chaos. So therefore, rationalism has the tendency of dismissing everything. So if everything is dismissed, how the nation will survive? Culturally, what is the identity of the nation? So this kind of thinking, open society, does not allow the radical women to be appreciated as heroes. But I think, see, if you look at the radicalities needed in transforming the Indian woman's life is much higher compared to that of any other, say, compromised ideologies. Compromised in the sense the intensity of pressure that has to be put on the society to transform the society is reduced. So let us go slow. Like as I say, compared to that of the Mustafa Kemal Pasha, Nehru had the ability of putting the pressure on the nation to transform the nation to a larger sense rationally, but he has put the less pressure on the nation in terms of transforming the society. So his politics we can understand. But however, when women understood that these are the problems for the women which need to be totally transformed or totally eliminated, then one need to look at the radicality of the woman is very important. Rational radicality of the woman is very important to transform the society or to question, raise the basic questions on the society that is still being under the control of the dominant male and the male who subscribes to the ideologies which gives lesser freedom to women. So therefore, since still we are having the dominance, Gandhianism cannot work. It has to be a radical rationalism, where Arundhati Roy, for example, and where you can have Pulan Devi, for example, Pulan Devi and Deepa Mehta, Sabana Azmi, and Barka Datta, Brinda Karat, V. Geeta, Meera Nair, Nandita Das. So all these things, all these women are certainly having displaying the ability of being radical, and that radicality is very important to see or to witness the required transformations in this country. But unfortunately, we have not seen the large scale or the more radical women than that of the Gandhian women. We are seeing Gandhian women than most of the people who have acquired the ability of engaging the reason, turning out to be Gandhian women. But the contribution of the Gandhian woman is, yes, of course, it is important, but it is quite minimal. The contribution is visible, it's quite minimal. So to increase the engagement of women with that of the reason, let us look at the today's domestic sphere. Today's domestic sphere, I am not backed by any studies, but if you look at the domestic sphere today, we have in public sphere as well as private sphere, domestic sphere, if you take, you have grandmothers, mothers, and mother-in-laws. So within the domestic sphere, if you look at how women engages with reason and logic, and when you bring the upper caste and upper class into this discussion, I strongly believe that upper class and upper caste women in the domestic sphere have already acquired the ability of engaging with the reason. But what happens is that they consciously, voluntarily subscribe to the essentiality of culture. They essentialize the culture, and in the process of essentializing the culture that is important for the nation, they give the lesser importance to the reason and logic, which means women, despite knowing that they have suffered for a long time as young women in their younger days, when they become mother-in-laws and grandmothers, once they get into a category that is upper class and upper class, they start essentializing the tradition in which they had a lot of pains and agony. So in the process of essentialization of culture, they control the adult and teenage women. They control the adult and teenage women from engaging with the reason and logic. They impose their authority. They acquire an authority. Within the domestic sphere, male dominates in the open sphere, women dominates in the domestic sphere. So the matured woman, the matured women, on whom they show their authority, on the adult or the teenage members of the family. The mother mostly, mother, grandmother and mother-in-law mostly take charge of controlling the female members of the female teenage members of the family. A male will take care of the male teenage members of the family. So here in the domestic sphere is what happening, that mostly upper caste and upper class women, instead of, not all of them, most of them, instead of trying to point out what problems they went through because of culture, the discriminative culture and religion and rituals and customs, they try to essentialize the same, probably with a lesser degree, because they certainly would not allow certain, primitive cultures to continue into the future. Some of them certainly they will question and remove, but not all the culture, which is discriminative, still discriminative anti-women, but they try to allow certain culture to continue into the future, and that they pass it over to the teenage and adult members of the family, female members of the family. This I found is very disturbing, where it becoming political. There, women, even the intellectual women, even the highly educated women, are unfortunately becoming political in questioning the culture and customs and rituals which have made them suffer. At this point in time, I'm talking about the present day, where they're becoming political and they're essentializing them. They're essentializing with the intention of, providing continuity, because that is a culture that belongs to them, that culture that gives them social prestige, power, dignity, identity, and also in today's political terms or political vocabulary, it also gives them political capital, social capital. Since these functions are there within that culture, they try to essentialize them. That is very disturbing. So if this woman, especially I'm not talking about radical women who are the finest activists in this country, who have been running the finest movements. I'm talking about this woman, especially highly educated, but they deny the existence of reason and logic within them. They don't cultivate the reason and logic that they have acquired through education. They essentialize the culture, essentialize the religion, essentialize the custom and traditions, despite understanding that these are problematic to their life. So as long as women do not understand that they have acquired the ability of engaging with the reason, despite understanding that they are becoming political because of their caste objectives, because of their class objectives, because of their culture is equated with the national culture. So rest of the women are unimportant. My culture is women, my culture is important. So because my culture is national culture, rest of the women's culture is not so important. So therefore, those women are not the members of not the members of the privileged women community. So unless and until this, solidarity, sisterhood comes along among all the women, unless and until women realizes that it is important for them that to realize that they have already acquired the ability of engaging with the reason, but intentionally they are not doing it, would never help the large-scale women to reform. Thank you very much for listening to me. Hello? Hello?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm finished.
Is there any question in the chat box? You can check that, sir.
Yeah, please.
No question.
No questions?
Yeah, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank